Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulihil Kareem. Welcome to the public forum of the World Council of Muslims for Interfaith Relations. As you know, from time to time we invite speakers and scholars to share their ideas on important topics. And we hope that today's presentation by Shaykh Rizwan Arsatu on one ummah under one God, Shia and Sunni together for common good, is going to be very enlightening. On behalf of WCMIR, I thank Shaykh Rizwan for accepting our invitation. There will be, inshallah, time to make short comments or ask a question at the end of his presentation. I request all of you to please mute your mic so that there will be no disturbances once he starts presenting. So, inshallah, Sheikh Rizwan is coming to our forum for the first time. He is well known, not only in Chicago area, but across the US. He's a contemporary Shia scholar, author, and educator based in Chicago. He is a graduate of the Islamic Seminary of Qom in Iran. Before his seminary studies, he completed a bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology at Princeton University. He is the founding director of Islamic Text Institute, a nonprofit focused on making classical Islamic sources accessible to non-specialists. Sheikh Arsatu has also founded IslamicLiteracy.org, an online platform aimed at helping Muslims become more Islamically literate. He teaches in various settings, including online seminary-style programs. He has authored or co-authored many publications, including God's Emissaries, Adam to Jesus, Prophetic History from an Imami Perspective. Another book that's very popular, I guess, Tajweed, A Guide to Quranic Recitation, a practical manual on character recitation. Another book, Every Muslim's Guide to the Islamic Legal System, overview of how Shia laws is derived and applied. He has also translated and provided commentaries on parts of Al-Kafi, the Tafsir, and currently is working on a multi-volume biography of the Prophet ﷺ titled The Last Emissary, Muhammad. And he regularly delivers lectures and seminars on various Islamic topics. Once again, I thank him and invite him to start his presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya Muhammad wa ala ahli baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Amma ba'd, faqad qala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fi kitabihi al-kareem. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا صدق الله العلي العظيم. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to Professor Inam al-Haq for reaching out. And I'm just getting to know your organization, and inshallah this will be a first step to more mutual contact with each other and mutual growth. I was asked to speak today about this unity of the Ummah, that we are one Ummah, one nation, under this one God who has created us and who has called us to himself. And I think the topic was particularly chosen because of the current political climate and the war that's being waged by the United States on Iran and by its ally and proxy in Israel against Lebanon and Palestine and Iran and all the different fitna that's there. So the stance that Iran is playing in opposition to these invading forces is quite a marvel and quite a beautiful thing for the Muslims to see. And it's creating a lot of conversation, especially amongst the Sunni world, that sometimes the question is as blunt and as basic as should we, can we have positive feelings for Iran despite the fact that they're Shi'i, or should we somehow be aligned with, someone else in opposition to them because they're Shi'i? And so there's this misunderstanding of what it means to be Shi'i and what it means to be Muslim, where we, sometimes are confused even at that very basic level, and we're not able to see the um, the connection we have with all Muslims, and then the connection we have with all causes of justice against all forces of injustice. And that's the bigger picture that I'm hoping that we'll be able to focus on today, and inshallah come with a better understanding. I don't have a very clear understanding of your constituency. Professor Inam al-Haq has helped me to try to understand. So just I have a mental idea of who I'm speaking to. I'm hoping I will be able to target to you all and not speak too basic in a basic way where I'm insulting your intelligence, and of course not too complicated or anything that I leave you wondering what I'm talking about. So I'll make my best effort to try to speak to you all in a way that I think is at the level, but apologies if I miss the target, and inshallah through the Q&A and the discussion we can adjust and get more to the exact audience you're speaking to. I'm going to speak to you in basically two sections. I'm going to try to limit my comments to about half an hour to maybe 40 minutes maximum, and that will leave some more time for Q&A and discussion. The first part of what I want to speak to you about is to give you a sense of how followers of Ahlul Bayt view the dynamics of Muslims, the origin of these different schools that we now have. So how do we view this? And then secondly, I want to focus on the kind of the central topic, which is Muslim unity, and why it is that we should be kind of viewing ourselves as a single ummah, and what's the basis for that and how we should think about that. So the first part is partly a historical discussion, but I don't want it to be limited to historical, because I think that's one of the misconceptions. People think, oh, this is a historical debate that happened after the Prophet's passing away, and so it's not really relevant now. Let's move past that. Let's get on with life. Let's focus on more important things and let history be history. And I want to demonstrate that actually that it's not. We can't be that flippant about it. It's not something that happened in the past and it's irrelevant to the present. It is actually something very important, and it needs to be understood in a more comprehensive way. So what is the difference between the two schools? Some of our Shi'i scholars have preferred a term instead of saying Sunni and Shi'i, which is fine. It's not a wrong term. But another term that I think is quite helpful is to call the Shia Madrasat Ahlul Bayt, the school of Ahlul Bayt. And that's because the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet, the progeny of the Prophet, play a central role in our access point. They are our access points to get to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As opposed to what we sometimes term as Madrasat al-Khulafa, or you could say Madrasat al-Sahaba. Sahaba is not such a good a term for this, because many of the Sahaba were with Ahlul Bayt and in support of them, and so the Shia are also followers of the school of Sahaba as well, but their main access point is Ahlul Bayt. So Madrasat al-Khulafa is one of the terms that we'll use sometimes to refer to Ahlul Sunnah, those who are accessing the prophetic teachings through other people besides Ahlul Bayt. The difference that it makes for us now, I want to emphasize that it's not just a historical debate that happened after the Prophet's passing, but it still has deep consequences for our understanding of our deen now. On all fronts, Islamic teachings, of course, are comprehensive and deal with theological beliefs. What is true and what do we believe? And then also, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to live our lives? So what are the values that we sometimes use the term akhlaq for? And what are the red lines and the laws, the guidance, the practical guidance that Allah has given us through His Prophet to tell us what we must do or what we must not do, and how we're supposed to live our lives. So all this is, in a nutshell, the comprehensive teachings of Islam. And depending on, well, let's start with the first thing. All Muslims, what unifies us is we're all trying to get closer to Allah. And we're trying to do our duty to Allah. And we recognize that He has reached out to us through revelation. He has reached out to us through prophets chosen by Him for this purpose. And so all Muslims are unified in trying to now get to Allah through revelation and through prophetic sunnah and prophetic teaching. And this is the goal. Now, how do we access that? The Quran, of course, we have in our hands. You have in your hand, I have in my hand. We have the same Quran, the revelation from Allah to Rasulullah. But it's simplistic to think that just because I have the Quran and you have the Quran, and every Muslim has the Quran, that we're all going to understand the Quran in the exact same way. And we know that the Quran is subject to interpretation. There are verses that are muhkam and very unequivocal and clear in their import. And there are verses that have ranges of meaning. And depending on so many things, depending on the baggage and the framework that I come to the Quran with, my takeaway from the Quran may be very different. And so the Quran is very important, is very central. But the other part of the guidance that Allah has sent is through the Prophet and his exposition of the Quran, his lived example of how to take those principles of Quran and bring it into the human life and to human society, his own practices, his own precedents that he sent. So all these are very important. How we access those is also very important. None of us has direct access to Rasulullah, of course. And so necessarily we have to receive his sunnah through intermediaries. And so Madrasat Ahlul Bayt, known as the Shia, are of the belief that we need to access the prophetic teaching and the teachings about the Quran through Ahlul Bayt, right? Through the Prophet's family, primarily Ali ibn Abi Talib, and then the descendants of Fatima, the descendants of the Prophet through Fatima and Ali. And that these are the people who were able to fully learn from the Prophet, and then they were charged with continuing to teach the prophetic sunnah through the course of a few hundred years, that we have this continuous chain of imamah. Those who didn't kind of align themselves directly with Ahlul Bayt, they didn't see Ahlul Bayt as their channel to get the teachings of the Prophet, they had to look to other people around. So the Khulafa and other companions who were there, who were kind of disassociated with Ahlul Bayt, they became the main channel for people to access the prophetic sunnah. So the goal is one. The goal is to get to Allah through revelation, through prophetic sunnah. That's a shared value that all Muslims have. The difference is how do we access that information? And the way we access makes a huge difference in what we access and what filters are in place so that the prophetic teaching starts to take on a certain shape because of the person who is learning it, the person who is conveying it, how they teach it, how they understand it. So it shapes over the course of time. There's a difference in understanding of aqidah. There's a difference in understanding of ahkam and laws. There's a difference even in understanding values and priorities. So all this changes over time, even though our goal is the same. More than that, one of the main differences between the Shi'i perspective and the non-Shi'i perspective is that we recognize that it's not just, our goal is not just to get this static Quran and the static Sunnah of the Prophet. And once we get that, then we're done with any intermediaries. The Shia see the Imams, who are the successors of the prophetic knowledge, as continuous leaders and guides and a lived example of those teachings. The prophetic sunnah is not just meant to be a static body of knowledge that's trapped 1400 years ago in Arabia in that particular context. It was meant to be a universal guidance that will guide all human beings until the end of time. Right? We have a famous statement of Imam As-Sadiq, "Halalu Muhammad halal ila yawm al-qiyamah, wa haramuhu haramun ila yawm al-qiyamah." Right? So this is the universality with which we have to look at the teachings of the Prophet. So how do we continue to access it and continue to make it relevant to our very much changing life and changing world? That is the role of the Imam who continues to bring forth those teachings and show us how to apply them in a changing world. And the actual personality of the Prophet and the personality of the Imam and their leadership is very central. So it's not that they just gave us a body of knowledge and now you and I come up with our own ways. We figure out how to manage things and how to carry forth, but rather part of the divine plan was to continually guide people and keep them on this path of the Prophet and his family. So that's a little bit about the significance of the difference between the two schools. It's not just a historical fluke that took place, and now we can, basically consign it to history and let's move on and don't worry about the differences. That historical event of assuming a certain leadership and sidelining another leadership has had far-reaching impacts on our ability, our understanding of the deen of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right. I want to briefly. So I talked about the significance of this. How do the Shia view this idea of leadership? Why do we? So this the central maybe tenet of faith that differentiates the Shi'i from the Sunni is that this access point to get to the Sunnah of the Prophet in the Shi'i conception is somebody who was actually chosen and appointed by God, somebody who has very specific characteristics in terms of their level of knowledge, in terms of their character, in terms of their righteousness, and that this person didn't just happen to be a very good student of the Prophet, but was actually someone who was nurtured and chosen by God, nurtured and trained for this position of carrying on the prophetic mission and continuing to teach the Prophet's teaching, not to receive new revelation, of course, but whatever was received by the Prophet as the Prophet of God, to continue that movement of now spreading and implementing and bringing about a just life and a just government that would encompass the entire world. Now, this is the ultimate goal. So, what is the basis? Why do the Shia believe that this is something that was intended by God, that was intended in the original conception of Islam? So, I'll just list some of the reasons, some of the evidence. My goal in doing this is not to say, so this is right, and now if you don't believe this, you're wrong. My goal is to show that there's a very reasonable claim, even if you don't believe any of what I'm going to say now. Even if you think I've misunderstood history, I've misunderstood these sources, that's fine, right? I also feel that someone who doesn't understand these things has misunderstood and has come up with a wrong conception. That overarching principle that I just started with, that all Muslims are heading in the same direction. We're all trying to get towards Allah. We're all trying to get closer to Him. We're all trying to learn and embody the Sunnah of the Prophet. This is a universal Muslim ideal. Now we're talking about how to get there, right? And I want us to have the spirit to say that you could read a verse of Quran and I can read a verse of Quran, and if we both bring good raw materials to the discussion. We both know Arabic well. We both know the tafsir literature well. We both done the due diligence to ponder over the verse well. We very likely will not have an identical understanding of the verse. Whoever we are, whether we're Sunni or Shia, whether we're Shia and Shia, Sunni and Sunni, it doesn't make a difference. Any human being who's now going to come to the verse, and then if you want to, like for instance, I write an exposition of what I understand from the verse, and the next person writes an exposition of what he understands from the verse, and is very close to the text, we will come up with slightly different or very different understandings of the same verse. Now, is one right and one wrong? Yes, there is a right. It could be both are wrong. It could be that one is right and one is wrong. But if both are sincerely making an effort, both are trying to do their best to approach that verse and come away with some understanding, then these two humans should have no reason to say, I think you're evil. I think you're misguided. I think you're deviant. I think you're wrong. Right? If it's a matter of difference of opinion, let me argue my case. Let me say, well, this is why I think this is what the verse is saying, and this is why I think what you're claiming the verse is saying is not correct. Let me make my case. Let me present my argument, and then you have your counter argument, and you say that I don't you know you've missed this or you've misunderstood that. So that should be the nature of this discussion, not to somehow undermine a person's intention and to call names, to have ad hominem attacks, to discount the person and say, no, I know you're trying to get to this verse and understand this verse, but I think you're going to go to hell. On what basis am I going to make such a judgment and such a drastic statement? I should just engage with the person in a very kind of intellectual way. We're both trying to find truth, and I present my case. I listen to his case. If I have humility, if I have intelligence, then that's the best I can do. All right, so I'm going to present a very brief kind of set of evidence that the Shia base their belief in imama on. Again, not to say that therefore Sunnis are all wrong. Therefore Sunnis are, for instance, condemned or deviant or this or that. Simply to say this is our understanding of how things unfolded and what the intention of God and the Prophet were. And the Sunni would also have another version of things and another interpretation of the same facts to come up with their own conclusion. At the end, I should at least be able to say, I understand your logic. I see where you're coming from. I see that if these things that you've claimed are true, then I can see how that leads you to your belief. That's a very mature, intelligent way of dealing with things. No ad hominem attacks, none of those condemnations and those kinds of things. So one piece of evidence that the Shia use is to say that we have specific utterances from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that guide the Muslims to know that Ali has certain qualities, that he is to be a successor, the wasi of the Prophet. He is supposed to be a khalifa of the Prophet, one who follows and rules in his stead. That he is the most knowledgeable, the most virtuous, and has all these different qualities. So the Prophet mentioned this in various ahadith. So they're just a sampling. We have the Hadithul Manzila, where Rasulullah says that you are to me as Aaron was to Moses, except that you're not a prophet after me. Or for instance, Hadithul Thaqalain, which is a more general pronouncement, not specifically about Imam Ali, but it's about Ahlul Bayt in general, where the Prophet repeatedly would make this pronouncement that I'm leaving behind two precious legacies, and as long as you, as my ummah, hold fast to both of these two legacies, then you won't be misguided, because these two will never part from one another until they come and meet me again in paradise. And when he mentions what the legacies are, Kitabullah is one of them, the Quran, and his Ahlul Bayt, his Itra, his progeny, are the other. So these are two. First of all, it tells us that the Ahlul Bayt are always going to be in line with the Quran. It's never going to be the Ahlul Bayt deviate and say something different from what the Quran says. They're always with the Quran, because the Prophet says, لَن يَفْتَرِقَ, they'll never part. And then he tells us that we should also hold fast to both of these lifelines to stay on the right path. And if we just take one and discard the other, then we're not going to have the guidance that we need. So those are two of the many ahadith that the Prophet has mentioned. Ghadir Khum's pronouncement, where he says, Man kuntu mawla fa aliyun mawla, is also a very important statement that the Prophet makes to declare Ali as a mawla, as a wali. And the Shia interpret that, understand that from the context of the event and the wording that he uses and all of these things, that this is not simply a pronunciation that Ali is my friend, or he's my relative, or these sorts of things, but it's something much weightier. It's about wilaya and authority, that as I have authority over you, Ali has that same authority over you, and you should obey that authority that he has. So these are some specific prophetic pronouncements and ahadith that show the role of Ali, the intended role of Ali after the Prophet. Secondly, there are some verses. That when you look into the asbabun nuzul, the reason why these verses were revealed and about whom they were revealed, then we see that these verses were specifically revealed about Ali ibn Abi Talib, and that he was being singled out for certain qualities, for knowledge, for having ilmul kitab, for having knowledge of the book, or for being of pure character. In Ayat al-Tathir, for instance, that Allah purifies the Ahlul Bayt, Ali being one of those members of the Ahlul Bayt, and He's purified him of character. That he has authority, he has wilaya. إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة وهم راكعون. This third descriptor, according to all of the Mufassirin, Sunni and Shi'i, say that this third character, the third description, is referring to Ali ibn Abi Talib in the incident that happened where he gave charity while in ruku'. So these are Quranic verses, and they're not explicit. There's no name of Ali taken, as the Quran doesn't take many people's names. But if you look into the hadith literature, the tafsir literature across the schools, you'll see that these verses were revealed historically, and everyone understands and agrees that these were revealed for Ali ibn Abi Talib, establishing certain outstanding qualities in him. Thirdly, the historical role that Ali played during the Prophet's lifetime. He was always the Prophet's right hand. He was always his helper. He was always the one who he would trust with everything. He was always he was a military personality who was the bravest, and he would use the Prophet would use Ali in the most dangerous circumstances to defeat the enemy. But in terms of knowledge, in terms of character, in terms of leadership abilities, in all different areas, we see that Ali always played that central role, and the Prophet could always rely on him as being his deputy in any circumstance. All right. And one of the things that comes from that is that Ali, let me move on to the fourth thing. The fourth is even adversaries of Ali and adversaries of his claim on Khilafah after the Prophet admitted very openly and very publicly that he is superior in knowledge and superior in character, but circumstances have ended up so that we're not going to give him any central role in the government and in the leadership of the Ummah after the Prophet. So Abu Bakr, for instance, he says, "Lastu bi khayrikum wa aliyun fikum." Right, the very public pronouncement, "I'm not the best of you as long as Ali's there," clearly saying that Ali is khayr than me. And his knowledge was undisputed, not only by the companions, even someone like Muawiyah later on would have no ability to impute the knowledge and the virtue of Ali ibn Abi Talib, even if he was a staunch enemy, if he waged war against him, and those kinds of things. But he couldn't, and he never did ever impute the knowledge and character of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So then the question for the Sunni, I think, is, and the Shia always wonder, is Sunnis will also very much say, yes, we love Ali, we praise Ali, we recognize he was wonderful, he was the best, he was the most knowledgeable, he was all of these things. So then the question, going back to that framework that we're trying to access prophetic teachings, the question that the Shia asks the Sunni is, how much of your deen, how much of the Sunnah of the Prophet have you taken from that most knowledgeable person who was the most knowledgeable of the prophetic Sunnah and of the Quran? And the Shi'i school takes all of its knowledge ultimately from the Prophet through Ali and then through the subsequent Imams. Whereas the Madrasatul Khulafa, if you look, how many ahadith are there in the corpus of Sunni hadith from Ali ibn Abi Talib, and in particular at the level where it's showing excellent knowledge, profound knowledge, which the Sunni will give lip service to and say, yes, of course Ali knows more than everyone else. So you should see ahadith like that, showing profound knowledge. Lots of ahadith. Most of your ahadith should be from Ali then, if he's the most knowledgeable. So that's a kind of a question that the Shia often asks of the Sunnis. you know, where is the evidence that you actually believe that Ali is the best access point for the prophetic sunnah? Then we have claims made by Ali himself, especially during his 5 years as Khalifa between the years 35 and 40. He has opportunity to give many public sermons, and some of those sermons he very clearly asserts his right that I should have been the successor. This was the intention, and he criticizes those who took over the Khilafah instead of him. So one of the most famous in Nahj al-Balagha is quoted as Khutbah al-Shiqshiqiyya. Al-Khutbah al-Shiqshiqiyya, it's usually number 3 in the sequence of the sermons of Nahj al-Balagha. And that's a very strident, very powerful claim that Ali is making, and argument against those who took the Khilafah instead of him after the Prophet. All right. And then we have, going down the line of Imams, they are also always telling us and helping us to understand the character of Ali and the right that he had. So it's not only Ali's own claims, but then his successors also always refer back to this and tell the story again and help us to understand what the virtue of Ali was, what the intention of the Prophet and God was, and kind of bemoan the dynamic that occurred after the Prophet's death, where he was not allowed to take up that role that he wanted to take up.
Can you feel Howie?
All right. Just make sure you've muted your microphones, please.
He's behind you still. Very close.
Okay, so I think maybe the host can mute the microphone for the one who's talking right now. All right. So that is a very kind of brief outline of the claim of the Shi'i. And again, my point is not to start a debate or, shots fired, and now it's up to you as followers of Ahlus Sunnah to say, oh, you're wrong here, you're wrong here. But my goal is to help you to understand from a Shi'i scholar what is our perspective. That we're not trying to destroy the ummah. We're not trying to, for instance, sideline the Prophet and say, let's put the Prophet on one side and let's find guidance from the Imams. Our understanding is that we're all trying to access the Prophet and his teachings, and we have different access points. We believe that this was an access point, the Ahlul Bayt were the access point intended by God, and the Sunni claim, to my understanding, is that there was no intended access point. The point was that the Prophet has come, he's done his job, he's left us with teachings, and now it's up to the Ummah to do the best they can, and going forward and take what they've learned and what they've understood, and with good intention go forward and try to manage things and continue the path of the Prophet. But there was no intended guidance beyond the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, meaning whatever we were able to understand at the time of the Prophet's life. All right. The last part of what I'll speak about, as I mentioned, the second half is just going to speak about the importance of viewing ourselves, seeing ourselves as Muslims, as an ummah, as a unified ummah, how vital that is, how important that is, and how important it is as a central tenet of Islam itself. So not that Islam, for instance, just has a set of true teachings, and now it's up to you and me to decide how we're going to deal with each other. But rather, I'm saying one of the essential teachings of Islam itself is that the Muslims are one nation, they are brethren to one another, and they must hold fast to the essential teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. This is our Islamic duty. As a Shi'i, this is my Islamic duty to see all Muslims as part of the Ummah, and my claim is that the Sunni and every other sect, they should also see themselves in the same way. One argument that's often used for this, to advocate for why we should be unified, always occurs during these kinds of crisis moments like we are in right now, where there is war, where there is a common enemy. And the argument goes that the enemy is very monochromatic, right? It sees all Muslims as one enemy. It doesn't matter whether you're Shi'i or Sunni or whatever stripe of Muslim you may be, the enemy of Islam will just as quickly kill the Sunni as the Shi'i and destroy the Sunni government as the Shi'i government, kill the Sunni alim as much as the Sunni alim, a Shi'i alim. It doesn't differentiate between the two. Therefore, it behooves us as Muslims, whatever our stripes may be, to unify, because when we are separate, then we are divided, we are weaker. When we are unified, then of course we are more in number, but then we can also share a common goal. We can have a unified front against enemies of Islam. We can share resources, we can share ideas, and all of that will only contribute to the ability to defend Islam, to defend Muslims, to defend Muslim interests better if we work together. So that is one argument that is given, and it is an argument and it has some validity, but my contention is that it is an expedient and it's a temporary, almost a band-aid. Because that argument only brings Muslims together as long as there's war and as long as there's a common enemy. But what happens when there's peace? When there's peace, now there's no more driving force that's making me be a brother to my Sunni brother and vice versa. And so now we can go our own separate ways, and now we can go back to fighting each other because we don't have a common enemy. So the danger of thinking that the reason for unity is the common enemy is that at the end of the day, peace will become the enemy of the unity of Muslims, which is a terrible paradox. In the time of peace, Muslims will start fighting each other again because they can't stand each other, and it's only when you have a common enemy that they say, okay, let's have a truce right now. Let's fight the common enemy, and then we'll continue our fight later. Or that's not the way that the Muslims are supposed to live. This is not the meaning of إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, that we are brethren, we are brothers of one another. This is not what Allah means when He says وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Right? It's not, well, as long as there's no enemy, or as long as there is an enemy, then hold fast to this and fight the enemy. But then once the enemy's gone, now you have to fight each other. That's quite a deviation from the commandment of God for unity of Muslims. So what's the better reason? What's the more fundamental reason? What is the Islamic teaching that pushes us actually to treat each other, regardless of our interpretation and our school of thought as Muslims? What is the Islamic commandment and principle that says that we must be a unified ummah and see each other as that in war and in peace? So as I mentioned, the Shi'i perspective, and I think this should be a shared perspective, but you can push back if it's not, is that we are all Muslims are after those fundamental goals. We're all after Allah and closest to Allah. We're all committed to the authenticity of the Quran as revelation from God. We're all committed to the Prophet and his teachings and trying to emulate his sunnah. So these are central principles that are more than enough to unify this whole ummah. Right, that is our common goal. Now, if we are all Muslims trying to emulate the Prophet, that means that we are trying to walk in his footsteps. What does Allah tell us about the Prophet? وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. A fundamental kind of basic purpose for which Allah sent Rasulullah to his creation is that he should be a source of mercy for all. لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Right? So if I am hoping to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet, I should weigh myself against that standard. To what extent am I a source of mercy, not just for the people who believe like me, not just for my camp and my group? The Prophet was not just rahmah for Muslims. He was rahmatan lil alameen. So I now have to, if I'm going to even try to follow in his footsteps, I need to weigh myself against that. To what extent am I mercy towards my non-Muslim neighbor, my non-Muslim co-worker, to people around, and then to my fellow Muslims, my fellow Muslim brothers and sisters who are following a different school and trying to get to the Prophet in some other way, if I am not merciful towards them, then I am actually undermining the very sunnah that I'm claiming distinguishes me from you. What a travesty is that? I'm claiming that I am following the footsteps of the Prophet, and you're not following the footsteps of the Prophet. That's why I'm going to be, I'm not going to have mercy towards you. I'm going to say you're wrong and you're deviated and you're condemned to hellfire. And now I'm claiming to follow the footsteps of the Prophet, who is a mercy for all mankind, not only kuffar and mushrikeen. He's a bitariq awla, we say, even at a higher level, he's a mercy for those who respond positively to his call and who are trying to believe in him and trying to follow him. There's more mercy for such people. So I, as a follower or claimant that I'm following the Prophet, then I have to also exemplify that by having that sense of mercy to all people. Look at the way the Prophet, he actually, the Quran talks about him as though he was, ready to destroy himself in his effort to guide people. He was almost, ready to kill himself, not literally, but ready, almost driving himself into the ground because he was so troubled. Why aren't these people believing? فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ إِن لَّمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. Allah tells us. As the Prophet's mercy was to such an extent that it actually was even, I wouldn't say self-destructive, but it was very much, he would take it all on himself. It's what am I doing wrong? Why am I not able to guide these people? What am I not saying and not doing that these people are not finding the way? And that should be our attitude towards all people, right? Whether they're non-Muslim, whether they're Muslim, whether they follow our school or a different school. If we want to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet, I should have that kind of attitude, not self-righteousness, that I have the truth, I'm on the right path, and these miserable people are on the wrong path, and these poor people have no idea, and kind of think myself superior to everyone. We see the Prophet's attitude being the best of creation, right? The most virtuous of all people. When he was interacting with people who didn't believe, his idea was not, I'm superior, you're inferior, you're nothing, you're wrong, you're this and that. It was, what am I not doing? How can I do more to bring you to the path? I've fallen short. Right? That should be our attitude as well to all people, non-Muslims, and بطريق أولى towards our fellow Muslims who are clearly on the path trying to get closer to the Prophet and closer to his Sunnah. We should have that kind of mercy for each other. I want us to think, sometimes we are tempted in these sectarian discussions, we are kind of forced into these silos where we have very distinct ideas. To be a Shi'i, here's the dogma you have to abide by. To be a Sunni, a Hanafi Sunni, these are the beliefs, these are the practices you have to abide by, and so forth. So we come up with these dividing lines. This is me, this is you, and I'm not going to cross over into your camp. You're not going to cross over to my camp. So we create these different dividing lines. It's helpful to think of a continuum that includes all of humanity. I'm not advocating for pluralism, not at all. That we should, it doesn't matter what you believe and any beliefs go and anything can be true. No, I'm not saying that at all. But in my attitude towards people, if my goal as the Muslim and one who's claiming to try to follow the Prophet is to try to extend that mercy and that guidance to all people, then I should see all people on a continuum. All human beings are either knowingly, willingly on the path trying to get closer to Allah, or potentially so. All human beings are either on the path trying to get closer to Allah, believers in God, right? Believers in the prophets of God, and trying to follow the teachings of the prophets. These are the believers. These are the mu'mineen of the world. Or they are potentially so. They are humans with a soul, with free will, and if they are not yet on the path, if they haven't yet found God, if they haven't yet made a commitment to try to get closer to God, if they haven't yet learned about the prophets and their teachings, then that doesn't mean they're evil. That simply means that they're potentially believers, but they have not yet actualized that potential. And my job and your job is not to condemn them and say, oh, because you're not Muslim, you're evil and you're wrong and I have nothing to do with you. My job is to try to help that person and say, what can I do to introduce you to the truth? to explain what I've understood of the truth and see, at least give you an opportunity to know it, to understand it. And a lot of that depends on how am I as a person and how do I treat you as a person. Right? I might have the right ideas, I might have the right aqidah and the right beliefs, but if my character in my own personal life and the way I deal with you is harsh and rough and dishonest and shows bad character, then I'm doing something, I'm living in a way that creates barriers for this person to even think that the ideas I'm saying might be true, because obviously I'm not even embodying it in my own character. So it's not so simple to say, once I tell you the truth, once I explain La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, either you accept it or don't accept it. If you don't accept it, you're kafir, you're condemned. It's not nearly that simple. Belief is something very, very challenging. And if we understand, the more we understand the human condition and all the different things that go into how a person thinks and believes, then we realize that there's a lot of work to do. For every single person we encounter, there's so many aspects that we have to address before we can help that person to come to faith. And so much of it depends on me. I need to be a better person. I need to be a humbler person. I need to interact with them with excellence, with humility. I need to be so kind to them and so overwhelmingly good that they look at me and say, I want what you have. Not just that I can debate and argue and prove to them that you're wrong and I'm right. That doesn't win hearts nearly as well as beautiful character. That's then, of course, backed up with truth, but beautiful character and kind of the charisma and attraction of that. So the burden of guiding people belongs with each one of us. My point is that if we look at all humanity as that continuum, right, and we do tend to, with non-Muslims, we tend to say, oh yes, we have to do, we have to invite them to the faith, do da'wah, and to invite them to the faith. But then sometimes we don't have that same compassion and that same optimism and that same attitude towards our fellow Muslims who belong to a different school. Right, so oftentimes Muslims will be very kind to non-Muslims. Your group is an interfaith group, but sometimes our interfaith activities may be at a very good level, but sometimes our intrafaith activities are wanting. But my point is that it's a continuum. All of us are trying to find the truth. And my job, if I feel like I know something that I've been able to benefit from the Prophet, from the Quran, my job is to help others to also know that. And how am I going to do that? By having good character and by teaching in very thoughtful, humble, convincing ways. And that's my job. My job is إِنَّمَا عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغِ, as Allah tells the Prophet. My job is to convey it, not to force you, not to condemn you, not to create a dividing line, say, oh no, since I said it and you didn't accept it, now you're other. You're distant from me. Now I have to cut you off. No, it's an infinite path. Until that person takes his last breath, there's hope. There's potential. And so the same compassion we have for anyone on this path, whether they are non-believers, whether they follow a different religion, right? Whether they follow a different school of thought within Islam, they're trying to get to the Prophet and trying to get to Allah, but maybe they found a way that I think is incorrect. My attitude should be, my job is to try to help all these people. Of course, that person on the other side who believes something different, their attitude is also, he needs to help me because he thinks I'm on the wrong path. And so that should be the mutual attitude that we have towards each other, that we see each other as an ummah. We see that we have a common goal. We're all trying to get on this path. And our job is to uplift one another, to bring everyone to the path. Let me say one last thing. It's not even just about one school versus another school. Within the Shia themselves, and I'm sure this is the same dynamic within the Sunnis themselves, we have an infinite infinite spectrum of people in terms of their level of devotion to the path of Ahlul Bayt. So if I'm here drawing lines and saying, oh no, if you don't wear hijab, if you don't pray regularly, if you drink alcohol, if you do this or that, if you don't support this cause or that cause, then I'm going to create a dividing line, say, no, you're wrong, you're off the path, I'm going to discard you. Then again, I'm not doing my job. I should be trying to build the bridges. All people who are trying to get closer to God in Ahlul Bayt, I need to try to bring them closer through, again, good character, good teaching. And those are the practices that I should embody. So that's my idea, that this is a fundamental Islamic principle. It's not just in the time of war and conflict that Muslims should be one ummah, but rather in times of peace also, just as much, if not more. We need to pay attention to the fact that all of us are members of the ummah of the Prophet. And our job is not to create our own dividing lines, but rather follow in the footsteps of the Prophet whom we claim to be following, and deal with all humanity the way the Prophet dealt with them. His first interaction with people was not, either believe or I'll kill you, either believe or I'm going to condemn you and call you names. He was so compassionate and so amazing in his ability to come to people at their level and then call them in ways that would speak to them through excellent character, through logical and excellent pronunciations of correct faith and true faith, and through developing leadership and environment that is conducive to righteousness and goodness. And these are the pathways of the Prophet, and this is what we also have to do.